I, Olwen, was the Luna of the Silver Arrow Pack, until I was betrayed. My trusted mate Aaron and the new Luna Kylie conspired behind my back, leading to my banishment. This betrayal is not just personal, but also a shock to the pack's values. Welcome to the Alpha's Love channel. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. Chapter 5 Forest. A beautiful meadow, as far as the eyes could see. A bright blue sky that was far too perfect to be real, and a cool breeze that did not reflect the humidity of the current seasons. Olwen knew she had to be dreaming, especially after recognizing the silvery grey-furred wolf opposite her. Opal. Olwen had barely seen her wolf form like this, but she looked different. There were no injuries, and her coat of fur looked shiny and healthy, not matted with the dirt, water and leaves that she had picked up while in the wilds for these past few months. And Opal wasn't even acknowledging her. She was staring off into the distance, sniffing at something before letting out a howl. And a moment later, another howl resonated back to her from incredibly far away. Opal's ears twitched and she took off, howling some more. Opal? Olwen called out, following after her, her bare feet on the soft grass. She didn't recall taking off her boots. The wolf didn't seem to hear her, her speed picking up as she bounded towards the source of the howling from further away. Opal? Olwen had no choice but to begin to run, her wolf zipping through the grass ahead of her. At the other side of the meadow, the responding howl became louder and louder, and soon Olwen spotted the sandy shape that was running up to meet Opal. It was another wolf with sandy brown fur and yellow eyes, a complete polar opposite to Aaron's wolf Ars. The sandy wolf ran towards Opal, and the pair slowed and began to pad towards each other with apprehension on both sides, as if each was waiting and observing the other's action. And then the scent hit Olwen. Forest after rain. Her eyes snapped open, and she was back beneath the shelter of a large rock near to the Moon River Pack. As Opal, the she-wolf, got up and sniffed the air. That forest after rain scent was getting stronger again, and this time she knew it was something approaching. It had not rained the past few days. Opal got up on her legs, standing guard. And then he appeared, the exact same scent-colored wolf that Olwen had seen in her dream. His yellow eyes were focused on her intently as he came close. Though she wasn't in control of her form at the moment, Olwen could feel herself swallowing lightly. The wolf was a lot bigger than she'd anticipated as well, his form almost looming over Opal's the closer he got. His forest and rain aroma engulfed Opal and Olwen's senses. It didn't have the same effect as Aaron's scent had on Olwen the day they discovered they were fated mates, no head spinning and no immediate urge to launch herself into the stranger and kiss them senseless. But it was pleasant, comforting and somewhat refreshing, even though she'd already smelled it a few weeks ago. Wait, did that mean that he'd seen her here? The wolf tilted his head at Opal and lightly sniffed the air once, before drawing back. He then trotted calmly behind a large tree, and after the sound of bones cracking and shifting, stepped back out fully clothed and in human form. In Olwen's mind, it didn't take very long to recognize him. With Alpha Landon glancing at her expectantly before looking away to give her some space, Opal headed behind the rock, shifted back into Olwen, and got herself properly dressed before walking back out and bowing. Alpha Landon, I wasn't expecting to see you. She tried to dust herself off a little to look somewhat more presentable, feeling the Alpha's eyes on her. The simple t-shirt and jeans she'd changed into after leaving the Silver Arrow Pack were definitely showing their wear after constant use. Miss Adams, it's been a while. He spoke. His voice exuded authority, and yet he didn't sound overly harsh or threatening. Now that he'd talked, Olwen was starting to recall their interaction a little better. I suppose your beta informed you that I was here. Olwen said, keeping a respectable distance from him. Alpha Landon blinked, chuckled perhaps in an attempt to put her at ease, and then shook his head. On the contrary, I sent him to speak with you. Olwen stared in surprise, but then again, she shouldn't have been. Really? I doubted any wolves from the other packs would remember me since I've barely been to events outside of the Silver Arrow pack. In hindsight, I should have seen this as a sign that I wasn't going to be taken seriously as the Luna. She thought to herself. An expression passed through Alpha Landon's face before he nodded slowly. I suppose you could say you made quite the impression on me even though we only talked for a brief moment. Flattered, Olwen dipped her head. Thank you. A period of awkward silence ensued before she broke it. I take it that Beta Elijah told you what happened to me, and how I ended up here as a rogue. He did. Alpha Landon took a single step towards her. In his human form, he was still a head taller than her, but the expression on his face was sympathetic. I am sorry for what transpired within the Silver Arrow pack. What Aaron and his father did to you was not right. I've come to terms with it, in my own way. Olwen assured him, managing a small shrug. I should have known that they would never accept an Omega as the Luna. Alpha Landon frowned at this. If she didn't know any better, he looked almost defensive. Being an Omega shouldn't define your lifelong abilities. Olwen smiled sadly. Tell that to the stronger and more capable she-wolf that Aaron and Alpha Bradley replaced me with. Kylie Paxton. The she-wolf who broke up with her mate in the Snow Fang pack. Landon asked, tilting his head. I've heard word of the incident. Yes, I felt bad for her after she was rejected by her mate, so I looked out for her, and reached out to her like a sister, when I was still in the Silver Arrow pack. Olwen shook her head. I just never thought that she would hold on. The man interrupted, his eyebrows furrowing in confusion. Did you just say that Kylie was rejected by her mate? Yes. I met with the Alpha from the Snow Fang pack a few weeks ago. He said that Kylie was the one who carried out the rejection. Olwen suddenly felt as if a cold bucket of water had been dumped on her. What? Alpha Maxwell is good friends with her former mate, Oliver. He said that Oliver has been distraught ever since it happened. Apparently, he was awoken one night to find that Kylie had packed her things. She gave him no warning and no explanation, just rejected him and left. Upon hearing this, Olwen had to sit down on the nearby rock to absorb this information. If she had been told this 4 months ago, she would have defended Kylie without question, but now knowing what Kylie had done with Aaron behind her back. Olwen recalled how the woman had collapsed in front of her in tears when she'd first arrived back in the Silver Arrow pack, telling everyone how Oliver had rejected her. Did she lie to get everyone to sympathize with her, including me? Alpha Landon wisely chose to end the speculation right there. Perhaps we won't know for sure, but enough about Kylie for now. Beta Elijah told me you've been out in the Evergreen Wilds as a rogue for 3 months. I've had reports of more and more wild wolves showing up around these areas. Would you consider staying in the Moon River pack, at least for a while? It's not safe for you to be out here alone. Olwen's first instinct was to bristle. I can handle myself. I know you can, but Alpha Landon stopped short. He seemed hesitant and briefly wondered if it was the right time to say what he was doing to say next, and then he exhaled quietly. If something happened to you when I know I could do something, I don't think I could forgive myself. Olwen looked at him with a confused and stunned expression, which he returned with some amount of embarrassment. It is probably too soon to say this, and I'll explain myself a bit more later, but I wasn't just flattering you earlier, when I said I remembered you from the function last year. His blue eyes darted away from hers as he scratched the back of his neck. I didn't know you were Aaron's mate because you didn't bear his mark, so I thought you were maybe one of the Alpha's daughters. Before Aaron came over and interrupted our conversation, I was considering trying to court you. You were what? Olwen's throat ran dry as even within her, Opal stood up in surprise and some amount of interest. What? Yes, you were the first she-wolf I had come across in years to catch my eye. But you were someone else's mate, so I was prepared to just let it be. And I thought I did, up until I came across you near the pack borders a few weeks ago, and I immediately recognized your scent. I see, but what about your FA? I was rejected by my fated. Oh? Olwen opened her mouth to say something, but couldn't think of what to respond with, and when she did speak it was just one word. When? A few years before I became the Alpha of the Moon River Pack. Alpha Landon went to sit on the rock nearby, his eyes flickering down as a bittersweet smile appeared onto his face. Her name was Rianne. I found her sitting under a tree, watching the sunset. My wolf went crazy the moment we saw her, and I foolishly thought that things would be smooth sailing from there. But she left one morning, and she didn't even meet with me face to face while rejecting me. Apparently she was scared of the responsibilities that came with being the mate of the future Alpha. She'd been undergoing lunar training, but she decided she didn't want the position or our mate bond in the end. That explained the sadness Olwen had remembered seeing in Alpha Landon's eyes that night, when the subject of fated mates came up at the function. She couldn't help suddenly feeling embarrassed of herself for bringing it up, but she had assumed that given how close to her age he appeared that he just hadn't found his fated yet. Why didn't you mention it at the function? Landon chuckled, his eyes briefly flickering up to hers and then back down again, as he shook his head. It's a little hard to explain to others outside of the pack. That and I didn't want to give the Alphas and Lunas more hope that I'd consider taking one of their daughters as my chosen mate. So you still don't have a Luna? The Alpha shook his head. No. I used to believe wholeheartedly in the mate bond, so it's a little difficult for me to select someone I would take as a chosen mate, regardless of all the hearsay about how a Luna would strengthen my pack. Olwen couldn't help the sad sense of irony she was getting. She had once believed in the mate bond, as well, and had readily accepted the role of Luna, only to be forced out of it, while Landon's former mate had abandoned the post of her own accord. While she did feel sorry for her, she recalled how daunting it initially had been for her, as an Omega, to begin training to lead a pack. She didn't need to reject her mate and run away. Having gone through the pain of a rejection, Olwen could only imagine how it had felt for Landon, whom hadn't seen it coming and was now leading his pack alone. But back to the point at hand. It's admirable that you've managed to survive 3 months out in the wilds as a rogue considering your circumstances. But it will only get more unsafe for you here on out. At least come and stay in the Moon River Pack until the threat has passed. How do you know for sure your pack members will be okay with that? Olwen questioned, eyeing him wearily. They may not be at first. Alpha Landon admitted, standing up. But given your origins from the Silver Arrow Pack, there shouldn't be much of an issue. We also have conditions for any prospective new members to the Moon River Pack. Conditions. You will be monitored closely for a few weeks at maximum. If you have no reason to make other wolves suspicious or cause any trouble, we will hold a ceremony and make you formally a member of the Moon River Pack. It sounded reasonable, but Olwen hesitated. She'd given her all to the Silver Arrow Pack. She'd been born in the pack. Her parents had given their lives protecting the pack. And if not for what had happened, she would have willingly devoted the rest of her own life serving them as Luna. In comparison, she'd never been to the Moon River Pack, only hearing that they were the second strongest pack in the Evergreen Wilds. Other than the fact that it was led by Alpha Landon, with Beta Elijah as his second in command, she only knew that the Moon River Pack had been named that way due to the river surrounding the pack territory, and that the pack prided itself on producing naturally adept swimmers. And if the Alpha's words didn't make it clearer, it appeared that he was at least considering making her his chosen mate. Perhaps Alpha Landon could immediately sense what she was concerned with and spoke. Miss Adams, I can assure you that whether I myself have an interest in you or not, my offer would remain the same. He said calmly, his gaze intent. Even if you do not want me to act on this interest, you can still be part of the pack if you wish. Olwen raised an eyebrow at him. You promise on your position as Alpha? It was a risky thing to say given this was their second interaction, but how else could she figure if Landon was serious about this? The Alpha in question dipped his head. We could sign a contract in writing if it makes you more certain. Olwen eyed the alpha with equal amounts wariness and also surprise. I'll give you some time to think about it, Landon said after another period of silence ensued. When you've made your decision, approach any of the wolves standing on guard. I'll inform them to keep an eye out for you. All right, thank you, Alpha Landon. Landon dipped his head before he turned and disappeared back into the trees. As he left, that forest-wise scent slowly vanished with him, leaving Olwen feeling cold and alone once more. You already told her that you were interested in her. Elijah's voice came in disbelief through the mind link. You might have scared her away before anything even happened. Landon suppressed a sigh as he re-entered pack territory. I wasn't going to lie. It was better than me asking her to join the pack, and her finding out later. Besides, I did emphasize it was for her safety. Oh, did you now? Fine, but I won't blame her if she decides not to join, even temporarily. Elijah responded with skepticism. If what she said is true, she's probably still weary about getting back into another relationship. Landon had heard no major updates from the Silver Arrow pack yet, but as leader of the strongest pack in the Evergreen Wilds, he wouldn't put it past Alpha Bradley to prevent the news about Olwen's exile from spreading. He'd had to interact with the older man a few times at events or pack discussions, and his father, the previous Alpha of the Moon River Pack, had already warned him that Alpha Bradley wasn't exactly known for being transparent. After those rogue attacks some years back, he'd gotten himself into a bit of trouble with the Alpha King for misrepresenting the amount of casualties the Silver Arrow Pack had incurred. He'd escaped any severe punishment due to the death of his mate, but Landon had the inkling that the oversight was due to pride rather than grief. Of course, there was also the slim chance that Olwen could be lying, but as of now Landon didn't really see a reason for her to have done so. And if she did accept his offer, the reports from his pack subordinates would indicate if she was up to something. For those patrolling the Moon River Pack borders, Landon spoke to the wolves through the mind link. Let me know if Miss Adams approaches and asks to speak with me. Yes, Alpha. The voices chorused. As Landon headed back to his home and closed the door, he couldn't help but still recall that lavender and honey scent that had engulfed him the moment he set foot within Olwen's radius, the aroma from the night they'd first talked and the first time he'd seen her again just outside pack borders. It was soothing and definitely something he welcomed after a long day of training with his pack members, settling a border dispute with the Willow Creek pack, and fending off more attempts by some honestly desperate she-wolves with the help of Beta Elijah and Gamma Josh. Opal is such a beautiful wolf, Lark rumbled with adoration in Landon's head. Don't get ahead of yourself, he told his wolf, heading off to go and have a long, thorough shower in the hopes that it would somehow wash away his memory of that fragrance. Long story short, it didn't. Chapter 6 Initiation. After contemplating her options for one more day, Olwen made her choice, which brought her to where she was now, being led into the Moon River Pack territory by Alpha Landon himself. Pack members who happened to be out and about and noticed the new arrival eyed her with curiosity and some amount of suspicion, and Olwen couldn't blame them. She did recognize Beta Elijah, who was heading out of what appeared to be a bakery. Upon catching her gaze, the man nodded at her respectfully, a gesture she returned. She followed Alpha Landon into his office, at which point he placed a form on the desk. Just fill up your particulars, it's for administrative purposes if everything goes well. Olwen nodded, taking a pen from the Alpha and writing down what they required of her. Name Olwen Adams, age 21, gender female, wolf Opal. Olwen continued down each line, filling in her height, weight, any allergies or health conditions, any previous allegiances, until she arrived at an optional box for other contacts. For a moment, she contemplated writing down Stella Anderson. She'd been her closest friend back in the Silver Arrow Pack, and the last person to interact with her before she had left. But after some thought, she decided to leave the box blank. If she was starting afresh in a new pack, She wasn't sure if she wanted ties to anyone from the Silver Arrow pack yet, even those who had been good to her. Given her choice of exile, she didn't wish for Stella, Kale or their mother to get repercussions from Alpha Bradley or heck, Beta Caden even for contacting her, and she didn't want to raise suspicions from Landon or his subordinates. And who knows, maybe they'd gotten used to the idea of Kylie becoming their Luna by now. Once the form was filled, Alpha Landon entered her information into the system himself. As Alwyn waited patiently for a brief moment, his eyes glossed over, showing he was communicating with the pack mind link. I've called for my Gamma, Josh, to come up and show you to your new home here. It's right in the middle of the pack grounds, and is where any new potential additions to the Moon River pack stay. I hope you're fine with that. Of course, Alpha. Alwyn dipped her head in respect, trying to ignore the disarming forest after rain scent floating around her. Less than a few minutes later, a young man with short auburn hair and grey eyes entered the office. He bowed to Landon. Alpha. His gaze turned to Alwyn, and despite the wariness in his eyes he greeted her. Miss Adams, it's nice to meet you. I'm here to bring you to your residence. I'll also be your guide in getting you accustomed to life here in the Moon River pack. Alwyn smiled politely and stood up, shaking hands with him. You must be Josh, the Gamma. It's nice to meet you too. Shall we get going? Of course, right this way, miss. Alwyn was about to head out first, but then stopped and glanced slightly back at Landon, who happened to be looking at her. I'll see you around, Alpha. Alpha Landon nodded, fixating his brilliant blue eyes on her for a moment before they went back to his documents. Gamma Josh seemed a little younger than her, but Alwyn knew better than to disrespect his authority. He was fourth in command for a reason. I'll give you a more detailed tour of the pack grounds tomorrow morning, but for now your home is here. He had led her to a small, but well-maintained house right in the heart of the Moon River pack, as Alpha Landon had said. He passed her the keys. Get some rest, there's already a bit of food stocked in the fridge. I'll see you in the morning. They both knew well enough that Gamma Josh would still be keeping an eye on her, and so Alwyn nodded. Thank you, Gamma. Good night. As the door closed, Alwyn placed down what little belongings she had left and surveyed her temporary home. It was smaller than her family home, and definitely not even half the size of the house she had once shared with Aaron. But at this point, she was just thankful that she had a roof over her head after 3 months of humid weather and the occasional pouring rain. There was a small kitchen with a fridge, a living room with a television and a coffee table, a bathroom and a bedroom. It didn't seem like anyone had stayed here recently, but someone had definitely been around cleaning and maintaining the place. Alwyn headed to put her things down in her new bedroom, deciding to shower first since hadn't had a proper bath in months. She had a thorough cleansing, and 1 hour later, threw the clothes she'd been wearing consistently into the washing machine. She found a simple t-shirt and shorts in the wardrobe, a little big for her but better than nothing. She made a mental note to ask Gamma Josh the following day about a good place in the pack to find more clothes her size. When Alwyn finally settled at the coffee table with the sandwiches she'd found stocked in the fridge, she felt more refreshed and satisfied than she had ever been in a while. If all went well, and Alwyn really did become a part of the Moon River pack, she was more than determined to prove she deserved a place here. Gamma Josh returned to the house the following morning to pick her up, at which point he began to show her around. While the pack wasn't as big as the Silver Arrow pack, the facilities they had were still pretty impressive. They were the second most powerful in the Evergreen Wilds after all. The Gamma took her to the bakery that she'd seen the day earlier to buy breakfast. It was a small place, with a light pastel green signboard with the words Croissants and Co. painted in cursive. This is the Pack Bakery, run by Mr. and Mrs. Atwood. They are the Beta's parents. A small bell rang as Alwyn entered the bakery, and she was immediately surrounded by the aroma of fresh bread. The inside of the building was small but cozy, with warm lighting and a few tables and chairs. The display case was stacked with various loaves, buns, and other pastries. Elijah's parents started early. "Ah, hello there, you must be Olwen." A middle-aged woman, who appeared to be in her late 40s, emerged from a curtain, which briefly gave a glimpse of the kitchen behind. She wore a short-sleeved light blue gingham shirt and jeans, and a pastel green apron with the bakery name printed on it. She had pale skin and freckles, along with darker brown hair and the hazel eyes similar to those of Beta Elijah. "Welcome to the Moon River Pack, and to Croissant and Company. What can I get you?" Just the sight of some warm, freshly baked food made Olwen's stomach growl. "One chicken pie and one apple turnover." "Any drinks?" Just a flat white." "Coming right up." Mrs. Atwood smiled brightly and began to take the pastries she'd mentioned out from the display case, depositing them both into a paper bag. As she calculated the cost at the register, the older woman spoke. "Jasper, honey, come out and greet the newcomer." A moment later, a man with the Beta's olive skin tone, but black hair and kind green eyes emerged from the kitchen, wearing a matching apron and covered in flour. He nods warmly at Olwen. "Hello, Miss Olwen." Probably not what you'd expect a former Beta to be doing in his retirement, huh? Olwen chuckled as the older man tried to dust the flour from his apron. She attempted to imagine Beta Caden doing the same thing, and he would look ridiculous. That man could fight off a horde of rogues, but leave him to bake a cake and the entire kitchen would catch on fire. "I don't judge. Have you been running this bakery long?" "I opened Croissants and Company when my husband was still Beta, and when Alpha Landon's father was in charge," Mrs. Atwood explained, as Mr. Atwood went to go find a cloth to clean his hands. "I've always loved baking. I didn't want to stop, not even after our son was appointed. And, instead of retiring like he rightfully should have after having to support Alpha Wendell for years," she quirked a teasing grin at her husband as she poured the flat white for Olwen. "He decided to join me in running the place. Please, I'm not sitting at home binging classic, who when my lovely wife is here running things herself." Mr. Atwood planted a brief, but affectionate peck on Mrs. Atwood's cheek, as he passed by her to stack some more loaves on top of the display case. Clearly this older couple didn't mind a bit of PDA. Olwen's heart warmed at the sight, even though her own failed mate bond still pinged at the back of her mind. She understood why Beta Elijah seemed to take the mate bond very seriously. His parents were the perfect picture of two wolves that the moon goddess had placed together. Olwen paid for her things, took the pastries and coffee, before dipping her head. "Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Atwood." The couple looked at her with welcoming smiles. "Jasper and Nicole," Mr. Atwood assured her, shaking her hand. "No need to be so formal. Down the street here, that's our local flower shop. Alpha Landon helped develop a new irrigation system when he began leading the Moon River Pack. So aside from crops, we grow and develop various species of flowers too." Gamma Josh continued, arriving outside another shop. The flower shop was called Nature's Bliss, with a wooden sign hanging on the door. The place wasn't open yet, however. "It's run by Jackson over there. If I'm being honest, sometimes he seems more comfortable with plants than his other pack members." Through the display window of the building, a man with raven hair and thin-rimmed glasses was watering some of the plants. He briefly broke concentration to wave at Josh and Olwen, before disappearing into the back of the shop. He's mated to Cassidy, the pack Delta. "You'll see her in a bit, she's at the training center," Gamma Josh said, walking on. Training center. Olwen thought back to her countless training sessions with Beta Caden in the Silver Arrow Pack. Before she'd been revealed to be Aaron's fated mate, she'd never been allowed to use the equipment or facilities there. According to Alpha Bradley, Omegas weren't required to know how to fight due to their natural ineptitude for it, but he'd made an exception for her since she was his son's partner. She'd been flattered then, but thinking of it now, she realized what Alpha Bradley had actually been implying. Am I allowed to use the training facilities here if I wish? Gamma Josh glanced back at her as they walked, seemingly confused and taken aback by that question. Of course. As long as you book the equipment or room in advance, you're good to go. Olwen felt her shoulders relax slightly at that. Olwen's first meeting with Delta Cassidy started with the punching bag literally exploding into sand in front of her. The Omega stared open-mouthed as the muscled woman with ginger hair and light blue eyes wiped her sweat with a towel, turning to face Gamma Josh and Olwen. In a simple blue t-shirt and shorts, it was clear the Delta was not one to be messed with. Joshua, what's up? Cassidy walked over to them both, drinking a bottle of water. Cass? Gamma Josh nodded to her with an amused smile, looking at the fallen punching bag behind her. We really need to start keeping an inventory on those things. Cassidy grinned relaxedly, before her eyes traveled to Olwen. You must be Miss Adams. I'm Cassidy. They shook hands, and Olwen had to prevent her eyebrows from flying up at how firm her handshake was. The matching of her with what she'd seen of Jackson earlier oddly enough made sense in her head. Josh seemed to notice her reaction and chuckled. Cassidy may be the Delta, but I'd say she's arguably the best fighter in the Moon River Pack. Aside from Alpha Landon, of course. Opal purred in Olwen's mind at the mention of the Alpha's name. Opal, not now. Do you train others? Olwen asked before she could stop herself. Delta Cassidy raised an eyebrow at her. Yes. I'm in charge of training a lot of the warriors of the Moon River Pack. Ah? Olwen nodded, and she pushed herself to continue now that it was out there. If it's not too troublesome, I would like to practice my fighting skills. The beta of my previous pack trained me, but I feel like I still have much to learn. Olwen could sense both pairs of eyes burning into her. Gamma Josh especially was tilting his head slightly. There was clearly more to that story, but he wouldn't push for it now. Delta Cassidy, meanwhile, observed her for a little more with a guarded expression before she nodded. You were from the Silver Arrow Pack, yeah. I'm curious as to what the beta has taught you. If you pass through the initiation phase and become an official member of the Moon River Pack, I'll see if I can make room for you. Olwen smiled. That answer sufficient for now. Thank you. If I can make room for you. Cassidy stressed, slinging up another punching bag over her shoulders and walking back to her spot. By sundown, Olwen had pretty much seen all the notable spots in the Moon River Pack. The library, while not as vast as the one from her old pack, still had many books she would be keen to pore over in her spare time. The market, where Olwen could get fruits, vegetables, meat and whatever other foods to stock up the fridge. And a number of clothes stores, where Olwen was able to buy more outfits that fit her size. By the time Gamma Josh had brought her back to her temporary housing, Olwen was still trying to cram all the locations and names she'd picked up in her head, when a familiar scent reached her nose. As the figure came into view outside the house, Opal jumped up excitedly inside her, and Olwen had to hold her wolf back. Miss Adams. How was your first day in the Moon River Pack? Alpha Landon. Both Olwen and Gamma Josh bowed their heads before the former continued to speak. It was great. Gamma Joshua makes a good guide. Alpha Landon gave the younger man a look of approval, and Josh bowed before turning back to Olwen. I shall take my leave now. I'll see both of you tomorrow. Good night, Gamma Josh. Olwen watched him disappear around the corner of the path before she turned back to Landon. He's quite well informed, friendly and seems to get along with everyone in the pack. I was surprised when he told me he hadn't found his mate yet, but she'll be one lucky wolf. And genuine chuckle came from Landon, as he gave her an amused smirk. You mean, he'll be one lucky wolf? He? Oh? Olwen realized what Landon meant. I am so sorry, I shouldn't have assumed. It's all right. Landon assured her. You're still new to the pack, and most of them already know after he came out a few years ago. I see. He's quite the open book about it. You can get to know him better once he comes by again tomorrow. Another period of silence went by before Alwyn broke it. I'm surprised you came to see me, Alpha. Gamma Joshua told me earlier that you're still in the midst of settling that dispute with the Willow Creek pack. I am. Alpha Landon admitted. But I always make time to check in on new members of the pack after their first day. I see. Alwyn was confused by the pang of disappointment his reply brought on and quickly squashed it. Well, things are going all right. I hope it doesn't sound like a backhanded compliment or anything, but the Moon River Pack has definitely earned its place as a high-ranking pack in the Evergreen Wilds. Alpha Landon smiled. Coming from a former member of the Silver Arrow Pack, that is high praise for sure. Thank you. His eyes briefly glazed over as someone mind-linked with him and he frowned. Elise. Again. He muttered under his breath. Fine. He glanced back up at Olwen. I have to take my leave. Please rest well. Thank you as well, Alpha. As Landon turned and left, with Olwen headed back into her temporary home, she thought she saw Landon's blue eyes flash to yellow. Don't pretend like nothing happened. You got jealous the moment he mentioned another she-wolf's name. Opal teased. Olwen sighed, shutting the door, and heading to the kitchen to unload all her groceries into the fridge. She had felt something arise in her as Landon had muttered something about an Elise, and as exasperated as he looked she hadn't cared. When he'd explained how he was rejected by his fated, Landon had mentioned how he allowed the leaders from the other packs to misunderstand that he had yet to find her, as a way to dissuade them from trying to set him up. But if it was common knowledge in the Moon River Pack. Olwen blinked and shook her head to try and clear her thoughts. Her priority now was to show she could be trusted, and romantically pursuing her new Alpha even though he was interested in her, was not to be on her agenda especially now. She didn't want any members of the Moon River Pack thinking she only joined to take the role of Luna, and become Landon's mate. Even if Landon seemed to be a capable leader, and protector from what she'd gathered. But still, it was strange. When you had a fated mate, you could still detect other wolves' scents, but they would never be as intense as that of your partner. It was how Olwen had always known when Aaron was nearby, or was able to pick him out from a crowd. Landon wasn't a second-chance mate, those didn't exist, after all, and yet she was half sure that of all the scents that had reached her since she arrived at the Moon River Pack, his was the strongest to her. Maybe it was because she found his scent the most comforting. Olwen shut the fridge, going to cook her dinner in an attempt to shut out any other thoughts about Landon. Chapter 7 cracks a few weeks later, in the Silver Arrow Pack. I'll take my leave, Stella. I trust that you'll inform me once my dress for the lunar ceremony has been altered. Stella smiled and nodded. Of course, Luna Kylie. Good, see that the seamstresses get to it quickly. The ceremony is in a few days, and I can't afford for anything to be out of place. Kylie turned and left the office, her Omega attendant, Jessie, trailing behind her and giving a small wave to Stella. A few minutes later, Stella filed away her documents and closed her laptop before heading back home for the day. Upon arriving, she headed through the door, greeting her mother on her way through the living room, and went downstairs to where her younger brother's bedroom was. He hadn't been forced into the basement, on the contrary, he chose to occupy it since it was the most spacious room in the house, where he could avoid disturbances from the outside world, including from their own father. She knocked on the door. Kale. I'm back. She called out. Come in. Came her brother's distracted reply. The moment Stella stepped into Kale's room and closed the door, she let out a sigh that summed up all the frustrations she'd been holding back for the past few days. I cannot stand that woman. She hasn't gone through her lunar ceremony yet, and she's already acting like she has. She somehow talked Alpha Bradley into giving her an attendant a few days ago, and the poor girl is being bossed around. You should have seen how tired she looked. She ranted, sitting on the edge of her brother's bed. Cale briefly paused whatever programming he was doing on his computer and turned to face his sister in his chair. It's fortunate you weren't at home a few hours earlier then. Dad came back to get something from the house for Miss Kylie, and he and Mum got into another shouting match. Stella sighed, taking off her glasses and massaging her nose bridge. If there was one thing Stella was, she was stubborn and stuck to her own beliefs. So when Olwen had left the Silver Arrow pack and Kylie had taken her place, Stella had started out thinking it was her own fault that she wasn't warming up to the new future Luna. But as hard as she had tried to find some good in Kylie Paxton, she only ended up feeling more unsettled that she would have to work with her for a significant amount of her life moving forward. During the first few weeks, Kylie had been in tears, consistently racked with guilt over what she had done to Olwen and spouting a whole lot of things about how she'd made the mistake of becoming intimate with Aaron after she was rejected, and that she didn't deserve to be Luna. It had made other pack members soften towards her, at least in public. Stella herself had almost felt bad for Kylie, but then a good question had presented itself to her. If Kylie felt so bad about betraying Olwen with her fated mate, then why had she done it in the first place? When Aaron and Kylie were together she seemed all smiles in comparison, without a hint of regret. And then a month after Olwen's departure, things began their gradual shift. Claiming he was trying to safeguard the welfare of the next Luna, Alpha Bradley had made a warning against mentioning Olwen in public, and especially within earshot of Kylie. He'd already been very intent on clamping down on speculations regarding what had happened in the first place, only announcing that he and his son had decided that Miss Paxton would make a better Luna than Miss Adams, while Kylie had blabbed about their affair starting after she'd returned to the pack on her own. That same day, Kylie had then moved in with Aaron, occupying the very space Olwen had left behind. And that silver arrow necklace Stella recalled seeing Olwen wear the day of the Olive Branch Festival. It was now sitting around Kylie's neck instead. What a shameless she-wolf. Despite Stella being the quiet and diligent type, when it came to interacting with most of her pack members, just having to be civil around the other she-wolf was really testing her and Star's patience. Kylie proved to be a natural fighter, but her attitude towards other pack matters could be considered flippant at best. She showed little patience in interacting with others aside from important figures, and didn't bother with any other daily activities carried out in the Silver Arrow pack, from patrols to helping to settle minor disputes amongst members. Other than social events that showed she was now Aaron's chosen mate and future Luna, Kylie had pretty much tossed everything else into the laps of Stella, Delta Jace and Gamma Edric. Earlier that day surely she can't be serious. Jace spoke, peering over Stella's shoulder, as she was processing a receipt from the boutique. She wants all the flowers on the dress to be changed from lilies to wisterias. This late? Indeed. Stella tried her best to draw her face into a smile, as she typed the details into a spreadsheet. She was tracking all the expenses made by the members of the Silver Arrow pack, and especially with her Luna and marking ceremony drawing near, Kylie was accumulating quite the costs. She was perfectly happy with Lily's. What happened? Apparently one of the warriors made a passing remark that Miss Adams had liked Lily's too, and she flew into a rage. Gamma Edric recounted. He and Stella shared a pained expression, as they recalled hearing how that same warrior had been sent to the pack clinic with a twisted ankle some minutes later. I wanted to trust the judgment of Alpha Bradley, but while Kylie is a strong she-wolf, she's also dangerous if she would turn on one of her own subordinates. Jace muttered, keeping his voice low as they sat together in the conference room. I never realized how volatile she was. Maybe the guilt is eating away at her. Edric responded with a shrug. The only reasons why a lot of the pack accept her as Luna is because Alpha Bradley and Aaron seem fine with it, and because she's a stronger she-wolf than Miss Adams. Though that second part could be because of fear rather than respect. The pack had been bursting with questions after the incident, even after Alpha Bradley had threatened them with punishment just for mentioning Olwen by name. And with several incidents caused by their new future Luna circulating, Stella could still hear whispers of speculation and hearsay. Maybe it's for the better that Kylie becomes Luna. Olwen could never be stronger than her. Kylie isn't just strong though, she's scary. My daughter saw her injure a warrior just for saying the wrong thing, and she came to me crying. The moon goddess put Olwen and Aaron together, not Kylie. Olwen should be our Luna. Olwen didn't even fight to stay in the pack and just left. We can't have such a disloyal she-wolf as our Luna. Well, would you want to stay in a pack where your fated has replaced you with another? Maybe it's better to just leave it to the alpha. If he thinks Kylie would make a better Luna, we can't do anything. Besides, maybe the rejection from Kylie's mate was meant to be so that she could come back to the Silver Arrow pack. Just hearing all those whispers that implied that Olwen somehow had that chain of events coming for her made Stella clench her fist as she sat on her brother's bed. I miss her too, sis. Kale said, recognizing the frustration on Stella's face. I didn't know her that well, but she was one of the few people in the pack that didn't treat me like an outsider for doing what I do. If anyone was most affected by Olwen leaving the most, it was Stella and her family. Stella hadn't interacted with her a lot before she started her Luna training, but the kind-hearted she-wolf had endeared herself to her future beta in the span of a few days. She'd expressed her humility and willingness to learn everything there was to being a good Luna, and took on any task she was given. Stella had decided then and there that regardless of how much catching up Olwen had to do, she had her full support. So even though it had been months since she was pushed out of the pack, Stella wished she was here. She'd tried calling, but they never went through. She hoped Olwen was okay, surviving as a rogue at goddess knows where. Beta Caden and Sylvie were also arguing a lot more. Sylvie had come to see Olwen as her daughter when Stella befriended her, and she was just as, if not more infuriated than Stella that Beta Caden wasn't questioning Alpha Bradley's decision to force Olwen into exile. Sylvie had always believed in the idea of loyalty thanks to the story of how the Silver Arrow pack came to be, and unlike some other people, rightfully saw how the Alpha and his son had spat on it. But Beta Caden refused to hear any of it, repeating the Alpha's warning that his wife would be punished if anyone heard her disagreements. Stella herself had asked her father about it a few days after the Olive Branch Festival, and despite being sympathetic towards Olwen, his reply said all she needed to know. Alpha Bradley knows what he's doing. There's nothing more to discuss. Safe to say, Beta Caden was sleeping in his office a lot more. The next day, Stella was busy consolidating the inventories of each facility in the pack as a muffled, but angry voice came from next door. Well, I don't think it makes the room brighter, and besides, I'm the Luna now. Get rid of it. The shouting was thereby followed by a slap and shocked cry, and Stella immediately hurried to the Luna's office to find Kylie standing over her attendant. Didn't Alpha Bradley warn not to mention her? You're lucky I haven't thrown you into the dungeons. Luna Kylie. Stella put herself between the future Luna and the Omega, still clutching the right side of her face on the floor. Please calm down, I'm sure it was just a simple mistake. A mistake? Kylie was absolutely livid at the suggestion. I wanted to throw out that hideous potted plant, and this useless thing. She jabbed a finger at her trembling attendant. Told me that my mate bought it for Miss Adams. Your mate? Star growled within Stella's mind. The nerve, after you came between Aaron and Olwen. Stella knew better than to pick a fight with Kylie in the open, so she inhaled softly in an attempt to calm herself down before speaking. Please, allow me to bring her out of your sight then, Luna. It could help. Kylie narrowed her eyes at Stella, her eyes flashing to the golden eyes of her wolf Kira before she crossed her arms and looked away like a petulant child. Fine. Stella had been very careful not to cross the woman to avoid more unnecessary violence, but the moon goddess be damned if she didn't want to shift and tear Kylie's throat out right now. Dipping her head to the future Luna, Stella quickly brought the young attendant to her feet, and took her out of the Luna's office and to the sick bay, fetching something for the swelling red mark on her cheek. "Are you okay?" "I guess." The poor Omega, her name was Jessie, was still shaking, her eyes wide with fear. As Stella placed an ice pack on her cheek to reduce swelling, her gaze darkened and she mind-linked Aaron. "Aaron, I need to speak with you alone." "Now?" "Kylie physically assaulted her own attendant about 10 minutes ago," Stella said, fighting to keep her voice steady as she faced Aaron. "Over a plant." "I see," Aaron said, already looking uncomfortable. "Is Jessie okay?" "I treated her swelling and had her sent back home for the rest of the day." "You should have a good talk with your mate and ask her to calm her temper." The man nodded. "Okay, I'll talk to her. Thanks for telling me about this." As Aaron turned to leave, Stella swelled and forced herself to speak, her voice laced with indignation. "Are you sure you made the right choice? Choosing to make Kylie your Luna over Olwen? Why are you asking me this now?" Aaron didn't turn back around to meet her gaze, though his hand lowered from the doorknob. "I followed Olwen's advice to give Kylie a chance, but I'm concerned, Aaron. Other than in combat, Kylie has never paid attention to any other aspects of being the Luna, and she's turned on members of her own pack more than once just because they make a small mistake. I'm aware of that, but that's just how Kylie is," Aaron replied after a while. "She'll become more involved in pack matters once the Luna ceremony passes, and we officially mark each other. She's just on edge given how she got in this position in the first place." Stella cut in, narrowing her eyes. "Stella, I know you and Olwen were friends. And you were supposed to be her fated mate." Stella saw Aaron flinch slightly at this. "Are you and Alpha Bradley really that serious about Kylie becoming the Luna of the Silver Arrow pack?" "Yes. It's for the better." "Is it? So you're going to tell me that a prideful, unhinged she-wolf is a better Luna than a humble, kind one just because she was naturally born a beater? Don't talk about my mate like that." Aaron finally turned back to face her, his eyes steely. "I admit that Olwen was shortchanged, but even if I were to speak with my father, we have no idea where she is. You are going to be my beater, Stella, and while I appreciate your concern, I am in love with Kylie. She will be Luna. The future Alpha is useless." Star huffed, pacing back and forth in Stella's mind. How could he throw away his mate bond for a she-wolf like that? How are Alpha Bradley and your dad okay with her? "Star, calm down. If Aaron isn't going to listen to me, his dad certainly isn't." Stella had managed to save the potted bromeliad from being unfairly disposed of by Kylie, and was now packing it into her car. Olwen had cared for it while she was still here, and now she would. If only I had Olwen's bravery. She's never been outside of the pack before, and she got herself exiled regardless, by choosing not to go quietly. Stella had been entertaining the notion of running away from the Silver Arrow pack herself, just to make sure her friend was all right, but she knew the beater's daughter deserting the pack grounds would raise alarm bells. Besides, she had too many things tying her to this place: her responsibilities, her family. It was then Stella realized she'd left a file behind in her office, and went back up to get it. "We are pushing ahead with the ceremonies. It's been months since Olwen has left us, and I highly doubt she's in any good shape out in the wilds." Stella paused upon hearing voices from Alpha Bradley's office. Seeing no one else in the corridor, she moved back to train her senses on the voices coming from behind the door. "Of course I want the ceremonies to go on as planned, but there have been incidents recently," came Aaron's voice. "And if Stella is the one bringing them up, then that's none of our concern," Alpha Bradley responded. "Stella is compromised since she was close friends with Olwen before. See to it that she comes around to her new Luna, you have the authority to command it of her, do you not? But word of Kylie being unfit for the role of Luna is already circulating amongst the pack. It might be better to postpone the Luna ceremony until these doubts die down. We are having the Luna ceremony on the same day as your Alpha and marking ceremonies. Alpha Bradley interrupted firmly. If we delay it, the packs will only talk more. But you don't want the past 2 years with Kylie to be wasted because you're getting cold feet, do you? I suppose not. Good. If you want to be a capable alpha, you must be firm. Understood. Stella leaned her head away from the door and quickly headed back to her office to retrieve her file, her heart pounding. But as she drove back to her home, her mind went over what she'd heard and she frowned. The past 2 years. She immediately headed back to Kale's room once the main door was closed. Beta Caden was with a patrol today, and Sylvie was watching television with a stormy expression on her face. No knocking this time. Kale frowned curiously as his sister barged through the door. Kale, can you check something for me? Chapter 8 Dominoes. A lovely morning in the Silver Arrow pack was very quickly broken by the sound of everyone's phones chiming one after the other. And then, like the metaphorical floodgates opening, voices began to stream in through the pack mind link, reactions ranging from shock, denial, disgust and outrage. What the fuck is this? How could Aaron and Kylie do such a thing? It has to be fake, right? It all makes sense now, they lied to us. Look at how long they talked, they were so cruel. Alpha Bradley surely couldn't have allowed this. How could such sickening wolves lead the Silver Arrow pack? As Alpha Bradley read the string of emails that had been sent to everyone in the pack, his face grew redder and redder, until at last he tore out of his home. Dear Kylie, is Oliver treating you well in the Snow Fang pack? I can't help but be jealous, even though I have Olwen to worry about now. I miss you, baby doll. Aaron, dear Aaron, you know that you're the only one on my mind. Oliver could never measure up to you. Think about my proposal and get back to me, okay? Kisses. Kylie, dear Kylie, I've decided to agree to your suggestion. If you reject Oliver and return to the Silver Arrow pack, I'll end things with Olwen and make you my chosen mate and Luna instead. I know my father will cover for me since Olwen is only an Omega. Love, Aaron. Hi Aaron. I'm on the way back to the Silver Arrow pack. I fulfilled my end of the deal and rejected Oliver. I'll tell everyone that Oliver rejected me so that Olwen doesn't suspect a thing. Now you keep your promise. Kylie. Those were just 3 emails in a whole chain, some messages more explicit than the rest. Ignoring the shouts and protests of Beta Caden and Sylvie, Alpha Bradley broke down their door, hauled Kale from his bed, and dragged him right out into the center of the pack. Everyone else hurried out at the sight of the commotion, stunned and dazed. Why did you send such lies? Alpha Bradley roared, holding the smaller man up by his collar. Kale breathed shakily, but despite being lifted several inches off the ground by his alpha, he had a look of fearful defiance on his face. They are not lies, sir. I found them on Aaron's computer. Cut the crap. Alpha Bradley tossed the younger male to the ground, scattered gasps coming up from the onlookers. If you don't tell me the truth, you'll be beaten and thrown into the dungeons. I am telling the truth. Growling, Alpha Bradley shifted into his wolf, prompting Kale to do the same to defend himself. The watching pack members let out cries of shock as Bastion lunged at Cobalt, quickly grabbing the smaller grey wolf by the scruff and tossing him away. Alpha, stop! A group of shifted wolves tore through the crowd and dragged Bastion off of Cobalt, the former still snapping his jaws angrily. Bastion shifted back into Alpha Bradley, who glared at Kale as he resumed his human form as well. He begrudgingly restrained himself, as he felt a cloak being thrown over him and realized that the main wolf withholding him had been Aaron's. The other wolves shifted and covered themselves swiftly as well. Beta Caden, Sylvie, Delta Jace and Gamma Edric. The final wolf to shift was a jet black wolf with indigo eyes star. Take your grievances up with me, Alpha. Stella spoke firmly, throwing the cloak around her body as she shifted back. Kale acted on my behalf. All eyes on sight shot straight to the beater's daughter, including her father. Stella. Of course it was you. Alpha Bradley growled, standing up. Only you would remain loyal to that exiled Omega. Your family is one to talk about loyalty. Stella allowed her voice to ring out through the air. Olwen would have willingly given her life to this pack, and you know it. Stella, you've done enough. Just calm down and we'll talk this out. Aaron, still restraining his father in case, tried to use his authority on her. What is there to talk about that isn't already out in the open? Stella raised her voice some more. Kale knows what he saw when he tapped into your email account. Your affair with Kylie didn't start after she came back from the Snowfang pack, it started before she left. Despite the emails having been put out there for the entire pack to view, Aaron's face paled upon it actually being addressed out loud. Both you and Kylie lied to Olwen. You lied to the pack. Stella's eyes blazed with anger, catching everyone off guard. She'd never gotten upset to this degree in front of others. You led her on, made her believe you truly loved and cared for her, only to throw it all in her face because you didn't have the balls to admit you were fucking another she-wolf a few months into your relationship. Murmurs of disapproval and disbelief swept over the pack members as Aaron's face reddened. Seeing she wasn't going to get a reply, Stella kept talking. You sustained your relationship with Kylie all while she was in the Snowfang pack with her mate, and then you made a deal that you would replace Olwen with her if she came back to the Silver Arrow pack. You upheld her lie that she was rejected to evoke sympathy, so no one would do shit when she became your mate and the Luna. I would love to see you explain all that. It's not my fault the moon goddess mated me to an Omega. Aaron burst out angrily. I knew straight away she was too weak for me. I tried with her, but she didn't get me the way Kylie does. Then you should have told her the truth and rejected her. Or did you not do it because you thought she would be too weak to handle it? Stella sneered, her brown eyes turning bitter. Must have been a real humbling experience when she rejected you instead. Enough? Alpha Bradley growled, stalking towards Stella. You are to be the beater of this pack once Aaron is made Alpha. But it appears all you know how to do is stir up trouble. Me? Stella threw back her head and laughed, her emotions running high. Everyone watching was sure the Alpha could kill her right there and then, but his son, Delta and Gamma were holding him back with wary expressions. If you didn't actually entertain Aaron and Kylie's bullshit, there would be no trouble for me to stir up and you know it. I was thinking of what was best for the pack. And what's best for the pack is kicking out a she-wolf who had been loyal up until then. You punished her for her dedication. Stella Beta Caden placed a cautious hand on his daughter's shoulder. Alpha Bradley was in a tough spot, just back down a little. I will not back down. You can't seriously tell me you're still supporting him after the emails. Stella stopped short when she saw the guilt flash in Beta Caden's eyes, and her heart dropped. You knew. More gasps rippled through the pack members, including from Sylvie, who was holding onto Kale. Beta Caden couldn't meet his daughter's gaze and only nodded. Alpha Bradley and his son told me everything a few days after Olwen left. Why didn't you say anything? Sylvie's voice came, trembling as she stared at her husband, not recognizing who he was anymore. My loyalty to the Alpha comes first. Beta Caden said, shame seeping into his tone as he looked at the floor. Stella jerked away from her father, as if he had scorched her just by being in proximity. Her heart was pounding, tears threatening to form in her eyes, but she refused to let them out. She turned back to Alpha Bradley and Aaron, her red water boiling with rage and betrayal at what she had discovered. Loyalty. That word again. Is this what loyalty means to the Silver Arrow pack? As Stella spoke, Kale edged away. The girl's eyes glowed indigo, as Star briefly rose to the surface. You both are a far cry from the first alpha of the Silver Arrow pack. If the future alpha can't be loyal to his fated mate, and the current alpha can't stand by a pack member just because she's supposed to be weak, then what's to say that you both won't bat an eyelid when Kylie inevitably runs the pack into the ground? There was deathly silence as that last question left Stella's mouth. You dare insult your Luna? Alpha Bradley growled, his eyes shifting to that of his wolf. The distant sound of an engine starting made those nearby quickly move out of the way as the car belonging to the Anderson family tore into the clearing, Kale at the wheel. Kylie is not my Luna, Stella announced. Refusing to spare her husband a glance, Sylvie joined her children, and they all leveled their gazes at Alpha Bradley and Aaron as they spoke. We, Stella, Kale and Sylvie Anderson, reject the Silver Arrow pack. With an agitated roar, Alpha Bradley shifted again and made a mad dash for the vehicle, but all three of them had already locked themselves in. Kale hit the accelerator and swerved out of the Alpha's path, tearing through the pack grounds as all others scattered. Beta Caden shifted and tried to give chase, his wolf howling and pleading with his wife and children not to leave, but being unable to reach them via the mind link. The vehicle sped down the path leading out of the Silver Arrow pack, and soon vanished amongst the trees, leaving dust in its wake. Beta Caden's wolf collapsed just at the pack border, howling with agony as the distance between him and his family grew. The car was silent for a few hours. Kale was still at the wheel, his eyes fixed on the road. In the back seats, Stella comforted her mother as she cried into her shoulder. She knew that regardless of how far they were from the Silver Arrow pack, Sylvie and her wolf could feel the agony and grief that Beta Caden and his wolf were going through. Separation between two fated mates was never easy, and while Stella knew Sylvie still loved her husband, he'd made his choice by allying himself with Alpha Bradley and his son. How could he? Sylvie whispered brokenly, tears streaming down her face. He knew and he did nothing. Poor Alwyn. Stella shook her head, closing her eyes and sighing. Just rest, Mum. It took a few more hours of driving before Kale grew tired and swapped places with Stella. As Stella continued to drive with no true destination in mind, her eyes traveled to the stars that were shining down on them from above. She could see her younger brother and mother fast asleep in the back, the tracks of her tears still visible on Sylvie's cheeks. Stella sighed, briefly wondering if her mother would be all right. Sylvie and Beta Caden had shared a loving relationship before recent events had pulled them apart. Her mother had come to know of Stella and Kale's plan to expose Aaron and Kylie a few hours after they'd hatched it, and to their surprise, she'd agreed to leave with them if it came down to the fact. Perhaps a part of her had hoped that the revelation would finally bring Beta Caden around, only to feel betrayed that he'd already known. We had to leave. Star rumbled quietly in her head. The pack culture has become too much. They tried to hush up so many things, and we didn't know how bad it was until now. The Alpha could have killed our brother for all we know. Stella's mind showed her the image of Bastion throwing Cobalt across the ground, prompting an unnaturally low growl to come from the she-wolf's throat. Alpha Bradley had known that neither Kale nor his wolf were much of fighters, and he'd used that fact to his advantage. If he hadn't been stopped. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel, trying to restrain herself from shifting just from the anger and protectiveness that stirred in her gut. She and her brother and mother were packless now, just like Olwen was. The difference was that at least she, Kale and Sylvie had each other. Olwen had been alone. Stella wondered if she could ever find out where her friend had gone off to. She had tried to call her again when Kale was still driving them, but once more the connection didn't go through. When Stella's eyelids grew heavy, she stopped the car by the side of the road, cutting the engine and leaving the windows rolled down, as she herself drifted off to sleep alongside her mother and brother. Stella. When Stella's eyes opened again, it was much to her confusion that she was now in an open field. No trees, no flowers, just grass stretching as far as the human gaze could see, and the night sky with stars still twinkling overhead like a galaxy. There was a soft howl from somewhere behind Stella, and she turned to see Star trotting across the clearing towards her. Her indigo eyes were almost glowing and her black fur glittered in the moonlight. Star. Stella never got to see her wolf in this manner, but she could see where her namesake had come from. She bent down as Star approached, gently rubbing her behind the ears as the wolf purred happily. Stella. Stella jumped at the new voice, turning to face a glowing woman in white who appeared behind her. Star noticed her too, wagging her tail excitedly. This was definitely a dream. Who are you? The woman smiled calmly at Stella, bending down to pat Star as well. She had soft grey eyes, her pale blonde hair glowing. My name is Selene and I am the moon goddess. Stella's mouth dropped, and she immediately got onto her knees. The moon goddess. Why are you here? The woman chuckled softly and gestured for Stella to get back up, Star sitting obediently beside her, and wagging her tail still. You and your family are a long way from home. Stella smiled sadly and nodded. Yes, she paused. You're not going to tell me to go back there, are you? Again, the moon goddess laughed and shook her head. No. But I am here to give you another direction, to head towards the location of your friend, Alwyn Adams. Stella's eyes widened as Star got up excitedly. She wanted to see Opal again. You know where Alwyn is? She burst out on impulse, before she smacked her forehead in embarrassment. Of course you do, you're the moon goddess for goodness sakes. Selene fortunately overlooked Stella's verbal slip-up, and nodded with a peaceful smile on her face. Yes indeed. Alwyn's life as a rogue brought her all the way to the other side of the Evergreen Wilds, where she has just been inducted into the Moon River Pack. Stella raised an eyebrow in surprise. The second strongest pack in the wilds. So you want me to head there and find her? Yes. Your friend doesn't know it yet, but she's the central character to something that will change the fate of the packs in the Evergreen Wilds. Selene said, her eyes glancing up to the night sky above them. And she will need you and your family's support. At this, Stella's eyes brightened, her heart filling with hope. Of course. I hope she's doing okay. I believe she's more than okay, and once you reach the Moon River Pack, you will be too. A flash of mischief appeared in Selene's gaze, confusing Stella. What do you mean by that? You'll find out once you arrive. Selene responded gently. But for now, this is all I can tell you. Very well, Moon Goddess. Stella bowed one more time. I'll start on the trail towards the Moon River Pack in the morning. And Stella? Yes? The Moon Goddess looked a bit more serious as she next spoke. Promise me that you will not tell Alwyn of my help when you arrive at the Moon River Pack. Once the time is right, I will let her know myself of her role in this. It is too early for her now. Stella hesitated briefly, but then nodded, resolve flooding her expression. I promise. She then woke with a start, hearing her brother and mother yawn and stretch in the back seats. Kale, Mum, take some time outside the car to stretch yourselves and let your wolves out for a bit. Stella spoke, unlocking the car. Sylvie blinked owlishly, as Kale climbed outside into the fields first. What's the hurry, dear? I had a dream where the Moon Goddess came to me. Stella said, as both her family members looked at her in astonishment. We need to head to the Moon River Pack to find Alwyn. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode of the story, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to get notifications for updates.